Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. I come to the floor today with my colleagues in defense of the millions of federal workers around the country who have been targeted by President Trump and his administration, including tens of thousands of workers in my home state of Washington. Federal workers go to work every day, performing jobs that often go unnoticed or unappreciated. They ensure our grandparents receive Social Security and Medicare benefits. They investigate claims of unsafe working conditions or employers not paying workers what they're owed. Federal workers are the nurses and the doctors who take care of our veterans at VA hospitals and facilities. They are our first responders when natural disasters devastate communities, including thousands of men and women on the front lines of the wildfires that today are ravaging the West. They help protect our drinking water and clean air as scientists at the Environmental Protection Agency. They educate us about our nation's landmarks at our national parks, and so much more. Mr. President, they work tirelessly every day to make sure our lives are a little bit better. And while it is the responsibility of government to ensure every worker is able to go to work without putting their health or safety at risk, earn a living wage to support their families, and retire with dignity, the federal government has even more direct responsibility for its own workers and should be a model for treating workers fairly and protecting their rights. Unfortunately, Mr. President, since day one, President Trump has fought to roll back those worker protections and undermine their rights. And now he has taken a number of steps targeting federal workers' right to join together and collectively bargain for better working conditions. Through a series of executive orders, President Trump has made it harder for workers to organize, for their unions to effectively represent them when they have a dispute with management, and for federal agencies to bargain collectively with their employees in good faith. And these executive orders target protections that were painstakingly negotiated and agreed to by both parties to make sure workers who are paid with our taxpayer dollars are treated fairly, and that workplace disputes in the federal government are resolved efficiently and equitably. Again, the federal government should be a model for employers, demonstrating how to treat their workers fairly and with respect. And by treating these federal workers poorly, President Trump is sending a clear signal that this administration doesn't care about workers and will do nothing to intervene when corporate management mistreats their workers. Now, Mr. President, these series of executive orders are not the only way President Trump is making it harder for working families to succeed in this country. Since day one, President Trump has undermined worker protections, including their right to overtime pay and collective bargaining, and made it harder for working families to become economically secure. And now, he has nominated another anti-worker, anti-union judge to our Supreme Court. Last month's Supreme Court decision in Janus made it clear that working families have to have a fair voice on the highest court in the land. Judge Kavanaugh's record proves he wouldn't be a fair voice for working families. Throughout his long career, Judge Kavanaugh has sided with corporate special interests at the expense of their workers and rights. He has argued against health and safety standards for workers, a view not shared by other members of the Circuit Court. He has argued against workers' rights to be paid fairly for the work that they do, and repeatedly has been hostile towards workers' rights to organize and join a union and speak up together for better wages and working conditions. Judge Kavanaugh has used his power as a federal judge to try to create loopholes for corporations to avoid negotiating with unions, and has even argued that some immigrant workers don't have a right to organize or collectively bargain. Mr. President, Judge Kavanaugh's record is not one of someone who will be balanced and who will listen to each case without bias. It is the record of someone who has consistently sided with corporations and management, and I fear he will do the same on our nation's highest court. And I fear that Judge Kavanaugh's pro-corporate, anti-worker record is exactly why President Trump and Republicans in Congress are pushing so hard to get him on the Supreme Court. So, Mr. President, I'm proud to join my colleagues on the floor today to stand for our federal workers and for their families, and I urge every worker who believes our economy should work for them, not just corporations and special interests, to make their voices heard. Call, write, text your senators, urge them to oppose this nomination. Our government, our economy, and our country are strongest when workers are able to make their voices heard and are part of this process. So I hope my colleagues across the aisle who claim to care about the economic security of our working families and the middle class will join us in pushing back against these harmful executive orders and opposing this anti-worker Supreme Court nominee. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.